สวัสดีครับพบกับผมนะครับสุภกิจกับช่อง Bitcast นะครับสำหรับในตอนนี้นะครับมีแขกพิเศษนะครับเป็นชาวต่างชาตินะเดี๋ยวเราจะมาคุยกันแล้วก็อัปเดตถึงสถานการณ์ของโลกคริปโตในปัจจุบันนะครับแล้วก็เดี๋ยวเราไปคุยถึงโปรเจกต์ที่เขาทำด้วยนะว่าไอ้เจ้าโปรเจกต์ที่ชื่อ Mantle เนี่ยที่เขาทำอยู่เนี่ยมันคืออะไรเนาะสำหรับใครที่อยากจะสนับสนุนทางช่องนะครับเพียงกดจอย Membership นะครับมีให้เลือกตั้งแต่ระดับกุ้งฝอยนะครับ35 บาทนะครับระดับเต่า300 บาทนะครับแล้วก็ระดับปลาวาฬ 1,000 บาทนะครับถือว่าเลี้ยงกาแฟผมเดือนละแก้วก็แล้วกันนะครับหรือใครที่ไม่ได้สนับสนุนก็ไม่เป็นไรนะครับก็สามารถที่จะกดไลค์กดแชร์นะครับหรือคอมเมนต์ภายใต้คลิปนะครับใครที่เป็นสมาชิกเราจะมี end credit ท้ายคลิปให้ด้วยมีอีกเรื่องหนึ่งที่จะสนับสนุนกันได้ก็คือผลิตภัณฑ์จาก Bitcast ครับตัวนี้เป็น Unique Key 3C NFC นะครับสามารถที่จะใช้ล็อก Account นะครับไม่ว่าจะเป็นบน Gmail นะครับ Facebook หรือแม้แต่กระทั่ง Apple ID นะครับก็สามารถใช้เจ้าตัวนี้แค่แตะนะครับบน iPhone เนี่ยก็สามารถที่จะ unlock ได้แล้วนะครับที่สำคัญคือแอปอย่างของ Binance เนี่ยตอนนี้ก็รองรับเจ้า Unique Key 3C NFC เรียบร้อยแล้วนะครับสามารถสั่งซื้อได้ที่เว็บ thaibitcast.com นะครับขอบคุณทุกท่านที่สนับสนุนมากเลยนะครับได้ของมาแล้วครับแล้วก็เดี๋ยวจะเอามาแจกเพื่อนๆสำหรับใครที่สะสม Bitpoint นะครับ 5,000 Bitpoint นะใครได้ก่อนสะสมได้ก่อนก็เอามา redeem เลยนะครับ Product มันจะเป็นตัวนี้ฮะ One Key Classic ฮะมูลค่า89 เหรียญ นะจะมีแจกอยู่2หรือ3ตัวใครที่ติดตามทางช่องในไลฟ์เนี่ยแล้วก็สะสมตัว Bitpoint ไปเรื่อยๆนะถ้าไม่อยากได้เสื้อก็มาเอา Hardware Wallet แล้วกันนะแล้วก็วันนี้เนี่ยถ้าเพื่อนๆที่เข้ามาแล้วเนี่ยก็นิดนึงนะจะเป็นภาษาอังกฤษนะเดี๋ยวผมจะพยายามแปลขออนุญาตเข้าเนื้อหาเลยละกันเนาะ Hi everybody today I am so absolutely thrilled to introduce you exceptional guests who will be sharing their insight on the current state of crypto world. This individual have an unparalleled passion for the crypto industry and his expertise and have a lot of experience in the crypto space. Our guest, Ajahn Kazi, please give me a warm welcome to him. Clap my hand. No effect, no effect. So I clap my hand for you, Ajahn. I know a lot of background that you are the person that behind the mental ecosystem. You are head of the ecosystem at Mental, right? Could you please introduce a little bit about yourself and the mental project?
Sure, definitely. First thing, thank you so much for having me. And just as a quick intro about myself, so I'm Arjun. I'm heading the ecosystem at Mantle, and I've been in ecosystem roles before. I've been in crypto since 2016, and this is, I would say, my second full-time job in crypto. So I started full-time in 2020 when I joined Polygon as head of growth and BD, and I was there for about 2.5 years. Now I'm with Mantle. As such, from a background perspective, I started with software engineering, and I have sort of worked across a broad range of technologies. Like I said, in 2016, when I first read about blockchain, I read the Bitcoin white paper. I was extremely fascinated by the idea. And then, in 2020 onwards, I was able to make it my career. And yeah, and this is kind of the plan at Mantle. So we're building an Ethereum layer 2 chain, and we already have a very big ecosystem. We've got some exciting plans, so maybe I can cover that a little later in the episode. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to start with the first question. Is about the Bitcoin. What do you think about the recent surge in the Bitcoin's price, and how do you see it's affecting the market?
Sure. I mean, price is something which is almost impossible to predict, or I wish I could figure out something and tell you that, oh, this is happening, or that's what's happening. But I think it just gives you a sense that what has changed. I'll tell you what has changed maybe from 2017 to where we are today is that number one, there is a lot more awareness about Bitcoin, about cryptocurrency, amongst the general populace, but also amongst, like, TradFi, amongst like fund investors, family offices. So I think what has happened is that people are beginning to understand more about this asset class, become more curious about it. When I talk to different funds, many of them, traditional Web2 funds want to take like a small percentage of their portfolio and invest in Web3, right? And try and understand the space from a technology perspective, from an investments perspective. So I think, I don't know why the price is doing well. Honestly, I don't think there's so many factors which would contribute to something like that. Factors in the Web2 space.
Mm-hmm.
For example, what we've seen with capital markets, and then there's been a bit of a loss of, let's say, faith in traditional institutions. What we're seeing, especially in the US, right, with large banks folding, and the government having to step in. So there are like multiple things happening on the macro side. But what I would just generally say about crypto in general is that there is a lot more awareness, right? And I think governments now are beginning to recognize it in some sense. They're dipping their toes with CBDC technology, or trying to form some regulations. I think we saw recently with the European Union, they ruled on a regulation to cover the entire EU space, and on a, you could say, on a charter to define some rules or regulation for crypto assets. So I think we've come to the point in our crypto journey, over the last like 8 to 10 years, where there is significant momentum that it is now like impossible to stop it
Mm.
in some sense. Like, maybe 5 years ago, it would have been possible to ban it or stop, like, Web3 or crypto, but today you just can't. I think the advantages of the technology are very clear to everybody. And I think with respect to the pricing of crypto assets and how that, corresponds to the price of other assets, considering that the price is still dollar pegged, right? It's not operating like a pure currency. So, all of those aspects are something which, through regulation and through other initiatives, like, we will be able to understand this better, and the world and governments and institutions and
Mm.
policymakers will have a more unified sort of approach on working with with this asset class. So I only see positive things in the time to come. The short term macro may not be great, but like I said, like, this is a movement now which cannot be stopped.
Okay. The next question, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges facing the crypto industry at the moment?
So I mean, there are many challenges, but I think primarily is a lot of it is, like, I think, like, regulations are definitely one big problem, right? So what we've seen, for example, like
Yeah.
when I talked about how European Union is creating some progressive rules, similarly we've seen in the US market, for example, the US government take a very hawkish stance, on crypto, and also in some sense for good reason also, right? So there've been a lot of crypto scams, there are hacks. We've seen several instances in which retail investors have lost money, which is always painful. And of course, like, what every government at the end of the day is trying to do is trying to protect their people. So,
Mm.
they have the right interests in their mind. They understand the power of this technology. But what happens in these situations? For example, in Web2, you've got bankruptcy courts, like, you've got like some mechanism,
Mm.
to deal with these kind of scenarios. In Web3, some of those mechanisms are not present right now. In the world of technology in general, what we've always seen is that the technology comes first, the regulations come later.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
example,
Exactly.
right, like, e-commerce came first, the regulations came later. Internet came first, then regulations came later,
Mm.
around data laws, around, privacy, and so and so forth. So I think while regulations are a big challenge, we've seen this before with every other technology. We will see this again now. For example, with AI technology, there
Yeah.
is now so much talk, right, about what does it mean in terms of intellectual property. What does it mean, when it comes to, for example, Microsoft's OpenAI using Google to train its own AI, and things like that. So we're going to see the same problem with AI as well, like what we're seeing with blockchain, around privacy, around ethics, around all of these other different things. But like I said, like, with laws and regulations coming, and with governments understanding that
Mm.
we need to find some way, and then discussions happening with top policy regulators, etc., I'm very optimistic that the regulations part will be solved. The other problems facing crypto, of course, are the same problems which have been around for 5 to 7 years, which is, even today, with so much innovation in DeFi, in NFT, in gaming, Web3 onboarding is still broken. And when I say broken for both the moving parts, right? It's broken for the user who wants to first time buy crypto. It's very complicated. It's also broken for the developer, where, not enough, like, for a early developer. It's a lot better than when I first started in 2020. Literally nothing. Like,
Mm.
today there is so much more educational material on YouTube. There are podcasts like the one you're doing, right, where you
Yeah.
inform users and, about how this works. But like, I think a lot more has to be done on the education side. I think with crypto, especially, with this asset class, there's equal parts information and equal parts misinformation in the market, and I think educating the user is extremely important. And when I say educating the user, I mean both the user and the developer, like people who will build their future billion-dollar businesses and people who want to use this technology for their own benefit. So this is also like is another problem which I've seen with crypto, which has not been, like, let's say, solved really well or very, let's say, elegantly. I think the third problem, of course, is that, like, with Web3 technology or with crypto technology, right, there has still been a struggle to clearly define certain use cases. So, for example, we know that Web3 technology can be very beneficial for gaming, right? But we've seen play to earn, we've seen some concepts which have not, let's say, added a lot of value or created a lot of value for the average user, right? These have gone into this category of what we call Ponzi-nomics, right? Where there is a short-term surge and then, project literally stops. So I think, there has to be very clear application or a clear understanding from the industry side on where this technology can be used, how it can be used, and what value it brings to the user, right? And the value has to be outside of just pure monetary value, right? Like gaming cannot be mixed with sort of so for example, there's a reason we play games for fun. You mix that with some type of ponzinomics, etc. It takes away the core of what this product is, right? So I think clear understanding amongst developers, amongst users, about how this technology has to be used, how it has to be applied, right? And where its value comes out is also extremely important. Like, there are places you should use blockchain, there are also places you should not, if it doesn't add value. So I think, we are also slowly getting there, where, people today have more clarity that, okay, here, this is a clear Web3 use case, or this is clearly not a Web3 use case. So I think this is also another challenge which, a lot of people in the industry, like, face. And I think with more education, like what I spoke about, like, a lot of these problems will be solved. But I think these are the core problems. I think everything else, to a large extent, has been solved. I think there's a big community, there's a lot of marketing, a lot of very intelligent people and very smart and ambitious people working in Web3. So I think several other problems are solved compared to maybe 4 5 years ago. But like I talked about, I said regulation, onboarding, and just a clear understanding of where its strengths come out is like super important. And I think all of this can be solved with more education.
Arjun, in terms of regulation, I think I scroll in the news and I saw, I think it has one news from Coinbase that sue SEC yesterday. I'm not sure. Do you read about that? It's quite weird, but the I saw in the news what they try to sue SEC is about, like they cannot do a business because it's uncertainty about the law and regulation. It's unclear. They just want the clear regulation. You can say don't do it, but please clear for them. They cannot do the business. That's the thing that I read yesterday. Okay, so go to the third one. How do you see the relationship between the traditional finance and the crypto evolving in the coming years?
I think Web3 technology or crypto started with sort of started like when we first started the discussion about Bitcoin, etc. It was to disrupt the financial system, right? So I think for
Yeah,
TradFi,
yeah.
like, I think one of the strongest use cases for blockchain technology is finance, right? And post which, we figured out NFTs, gaming, etc. And, like, today we have these discussions. But finance is by far the strongest use case
Mm,
for crypto and for Web3. I think what has become very interesting is like these sort of discussions around tokenizing real world assets, right? So and this is kind of when you will begin to see, like, a lot of mass adoption of Web3 technology, but also like how Web3 is able to introduce broad changes and improvements in sort of the global financial system, right? When you start looking at not just financial instruments like bonds, shares, etc., and bringing them on chain, but taking real world assets, tokenizing them, and then bringing that commerce on chain will, I think, really improve efficiency, bring in, like, a lot of transparency into some of these industries and transactions where otherwise, it's a complete black hole, where people just don't know, what's going on, and there's a huge amount of information asymmetry. So I think these are some of the places where I see a lot of involvement of TradFi, right? And again, like, I think finance is so interesting because there's a direct impingement on how you can make, or how you can make more money, or how you can potentially lose money. I think these are the kind of spaces where you see a huge amount of innovation happen a lot faster than possibly some of the other places. So I think TradFi will also be amongst the fastest to to pick up or to adopt Web3 technology, since many of the use cases and advantages are very clear. And I think the most important thing which I noticed in TradFi is that there is a huge amount of awareness now, right? For the longest period of time, you had, the CEOs of the largest companies like BlackRock, you had SEC commissioners, etc., completely, say that this is a total scam, that, cryptocurrencies are useless and all of that. Where we've come to this point today, right, where there is, an acceptance that yes, this is an asset class. We need to figure out some rules, some regulations on how to handle these sort of type of assets. And there are, clear indications that the people in the TradFi world and some of the, let's say, movers and shakers of TradFi now genuinely understand and want to adopt crypto technology, so that you can do other interesting things. So for example, you could take instruments like bonds, right, which, let's say, is not something a common person might invest in, right, and sort of tokenize them and create other kinds of interesting financial instruments, like, bring a lot of commerce, or a lot of financial instruments which are currently outside, not in the hands of retail traders. You could bring it to retail, right, and you could do this at a global scale, with unprecedented speed, transparency, and security, right. These are some of the things which I think people in TradFi also find very exciting, that they can take these kind of innovative financial instruments. For example, like, something like, let's say, a credit default swap, right, which nobody had heard about, amongst the average, populace until the 2008,
Yeah.
housing crisis, financial crisis. Like, you could take these kind of financial instruments and put them in the hands of the common man, and then, they would be able to understand or use them. And this, I feel, is like very empowering, to have access to these kind of different financial instruments, some with leverage, some with not, and you're able to get, like, a large global community involved in this commerce. I think creates a lot of value, and a lot of innovation in these assets. And also, when I say value, it creates a lot of value because now you're able to get a lot of liquidity into the system, which otherwise would not be able to act, or may not be able to, sort of flow into these kind of asset class. So from that perspective, I think it's very interesting. I think people in TradFi are very excited about Web3. I think, like, we keep discussing with Coinbase, etc. The lack of clarity is, I think, what prevents, like, major institutions from going all in into this technology. But I think what's happening with Coinbase and what's happening with SEC, in some sense, is also good for the system, because it is prompting some really tough conversations amongst lawmakers and
Mm.
amongst, like, the general populace, amongst, like, people who watch the financial, the fintech and the finance industry. And I think something good will come out of this, where there'll be a better understanding amongst, like, policymakers, better understanding amongst the general people when they read about this. And this will only lead to, like, good outcomes. So sometimes, I feel that all of these things which are happening, these are good things, because these are prompting conversations which were not there before.
Can you discuss about the recent development of the NFT space and how it's changing the way we think about the digital ownership?
Oh, sure, definitely. I think so. NFTs are, like, super interesting, right? In some sense, that I think NFTs have exposed an audience to Web3, right, which would traditionally not be a Web3 audience, right? So, like,
Mm-mm.
we talk about how the genesis of Web3 technology started with finance and by disrupting the financial industry, right? What we see with NFTs are gamers, are music artists, and, essentially how, and you see Web3 technology penetrate the, culture side of things, right?
Mm.
Which I think is very interesting and very important, because it brings in, you could say, the mass audience into Web3, right? Like, finance, while obviously is a very important industry, is still in some sense like a niche, right? Not everybody follows finance, right? But a large number of people, including people in finance, follow music. Like, everybody listens to some sort of music. Like, people follow sports, people play game, right?
Mm.
Watch movies, people, sort of consume some content, right? And this is kind of where I think it becomes so interesting, is that with NFTs, we can bring in this entirely new audience into
Mm.
Web3. And more importantly, we're able to take some of these industries, like, so for example, when you talk about, like, things like movie rights, then you talk about things like music rights, talk about royalties, these are industries which have existed for a long period of time, like over, like, 50 to 100 years, but have been completely opaque industries, right, where more often than not the artist does not, like, sort of gain from his or her work. It's almost always like the middleman or some other, entity who does not have the best interests of the artist or the, let's say, the final consumer in mind. So I think this kind of disruption, where you can bring transparency into the movie industry, into the music industry, or rather broadly into the content industry, I think is super important. So this is kind of why I'm excited about NFTs in so many different ways, because they bring this kind of transparency into industries which otherwise there is no way for them
Mm.
to be transparent. Like there is no Web 2 technology which can, or any other technology which can solve this. So that's kind of how I feel the potential for disruption and value creation is very high. And to ensure that the value eventually is accrued by the artist, like the person creating the content, right? And versus possibly all the different middlemen. And now, of course, there's a new frontier, right? So with AI now there is synthetic content, right? And it's sometimes like difficult to figure out where the value of that should flow. But for example, using smart contracts, like you can automate some of these functions. For example, if any algorithm, for example, let's say creates an NFT, it gets sold, multiple times, royalties, etc. Like all of this stuff can automatically flow to the right person, either maybe to the algorithm creator or whoever, in some sense. So I feel that a lot of downstream, let's say, value creation, you can stream this to the right parties using smart contracts. So essentially, in some sense, automate a lot of this value creation. So tomorrow, for example, if you decide to create some content, you know that whatever value is generated by that content will automatically flow to you. You don't have to worry about or do any follow-ups or things like that, or follow like the system which is there today with a complete black box. And you have to sign like different legal contracts in different places in the world to kind of figure out, what has to be done. So moving these industries like gaming and music, and arts and culture, moving these industries away from, let's say, being predominantly run by lawyers and accountants towards an industry which is primarily now run by artists and creators of this content, right, who are finally accruing most of the value or capturing most of the value in this sort of business, is, I think, super important, for the business in general, and for the creators, and for this movement to continue. So that's kind of what I think really excites me about NFTs in this space. Outside of course ownership and some of those other attributes are great, but the potential to disrupt completely black box industries which have stayed black boxes for over like 50 100 years is, I think, more exciting for me.
Yes. Please, a little bit more, like explain about the downsides of the NFT space. I'm not quite clear about the downside.
Sure, definitely. So I think I'll tell you why, the DAO side, especially when it comes to NFTs, is such a perfect fit, right? So I'll give you an example. So let's say you listen to a certain type of music, right? And I listen to the same music, and let's say
Yeah,
all of our friends listen to the same music.
yeah,
Music fans, if you think about it, are a community, right? Like if you listen to, let's say, electronic music, if you listen
yeah.
to, let's say, pop, rock, jazz, or heavy metal, whatever have you, music is sort of, you could say, a cross cultural, age agnostic, sex agnostic, kind of community, right? And
Yeah.
these are global communities. We never thought of them as communities before. We always thought of them as consumers, right? But these are actual communities. Like when we listen to the same music, when we follow the same art, when we follow the same sports stars, right? We're creating, what we're actually doing is we're creating community. And this is essentially what DAOs are at the end of the day. They are communities, right? And communities who, because smart contracts exist and because tokens exist, now these communities can take decisions, right? Like and now these communities can sort of, actually interface or interact with either the music stars, or with the sports they follow, or with, whatever is the driver of that community, whether it is gaming, music, sports, whatever have you. So music, art, culture has always been about community. It's just that it was never thought of it that way. Like I would not go and say that I'm a part of a, like, for example, I would not say, if I listen to rock music, for example, I will not say, hey, I'm a part of the rock community. You're a music fan, right? But suppose you now join, let's say, a rock DAO, right? Or people who are interested in rock music, who want to support rock, like, new upcoming, let's say, artists who, like, create rock music, or are sort of participants in that. Like, now using a DAO, you can sort of create this global community of people who can interact with each other and also take decisions, and sort of participate in the commerce of, let's say, rock music. Right now, this was not possible before. Like, this is, like I said, what I love about NFTs and tokens is that it enables things which are not possible before. So I think arts and culture in general was always about community. And with DAOs, they become global community, right? You move past becoming an Instagram follower where you're following and consuming content. You move towards a more active style of an engaged user, where now you're engaged with the brand, you're engaged with the music artist, you're engaged with other music fans, right? You're taking decisions, you're interacting, you're in some maybe like community channel like Telegram, Discord, and I think when you move from just pure consumption, which is like follow on Twitter or follow on Instagram, where you're just consuming. And when you go from there towards becoming an active participant in this arts and culture movement, which now is facilitated by DAOs, is when this culture, or this phenomena becomes even more powerful and more pervading, right? And more impactful. And this is kind of why DAOs are such a perfect fit for sort of, like, you see a lot of NFTs become DAOs, you see a lot of, like DAOs participating, and you will continue to see more of them, because ultimately that's a very natural representation of what is already happening.
Now I would like you to explain the concept of layer two scaling solution and how they can benefit the crypto ecosystem.
No, sure, definitely. So I think with respect to how layer two functions was very interesting, right? So you have so in terms of blockchain scalability, right? You've got layer one blockchains, right?
Yeah.
And layer one blockchains are essentially blockchains which facilitate transactions, right? So you have a distributed ledger, you've got a execution environment where you can execute smart contract, and this is how layer one blockchains function right now. But what we saw with Ethereum, like what we saw in 2017 and in that time frame, is that what we saw was that there was a level of congestion. Like, so if you remember the CryptoKitties episode back in 2017, right, where there was this very cute cat game, right, and then this game sort of became so popular that it clogged the entire Ethereum ecosystem, right? The entire blockchain stopped functioning, and
You mean Crypto Kitty?
yeah, CryptoKitties, which happened in 2017, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
and then right, and then what you saw was that the blockchain was completely congested at the time, and of course people had questions, right? That if a cat game, for example, can clog such an important piece of technology, then how is this going to be relevant in some sense, right? How are you supposed to move a global financial system onto let's say blockchain, and this is kind of where scaling solutions become so important, right? So you've got a layer already of Ethereum, right, which where you've got smart contracts solved, you've got a lot of problems solved. What you do is essentially, instead of keeping all the transactions, everything on this layer, you basically take those bulk of those transactions onto another layer, right? So you create a layer on top of another, or on top of layer one you create another layer. Now this layer is also a blockchain, right? It is also a blockchain. It has many of the same characteristics of layer one. The difference being that by offloading a number of transactions onto another layer, you basically reduce the congestion, right? So think of it this way, that you've got a situation where you got a layer one blockchain, which is very strong, very let's say decentralized, highly secure. And what you've done on top of that is you've created another layer on top of that, right? And this layer is now doing the bulk of those transactions. And instead of putting all the transactions on layer one, what you're doing is you're putting the proof of those transactions on layer, right? So you have a layer one already, and you have a layer two. All the transactions are happening here, and then you take the proof that these transactions happened, and you put that proof on layer one. And why this is interesting is then you can take multiple different layer two solutions, and by ensuring that you're putting only the proofs on layer one, you can achieve very high scalability, right? So a layer one like Ethereum can support multiple types of layer twos now. So you have, like, let's say for example, the number of transactions you can do on Ethereum is X, and let's say the number of transactions you can do on a layer 2 is, let's say, 10x, not 100x, 1000x. Let's assume it is 10x. It's like even at 10x improvement, by having 10 different chains, you can give, like, you have 100x more bandwidth, right? So this is kind of why layer 2s are so interesting. It's not so much that, like, layer 2s are faster, more performant, etc., that they offer a very similar environment to layer 1. But I think what is most interesting about layer 2 technology in general is that you can have multiple layer 2s operate on a single layer 1, thereby bringing huge amount of scalability, different types of use cases, and diversity to the larger ecosystem, right? Which I think is the most interesting aspect of layer 2 technology, right? So scalability and solving for mass adoption is one, but the fact that the way the technology is structured, you would have multiple layer twos working on one layer one is I think, like, super interesting. And this is what we're seeing with Ethereum. There's so many different layer twos, each with their own communities, and this just improves access to blockchain technology, and sort of accelerates the path to mass adoption.
Okay. How do you see the competition amongst layer two scaling solution playing out? And what do you think sets mental part from other solutions?
No, great question. So I think so. I don't feel that. So before, like, I get into what makes Mantle interesting is that I don't think there's going to be a future where there is only one single chain which is going to be the winner. I think we've seen. So if for example, if you consider, let's say, blockchain to be decentralized compute, right? And if you see what happened in, let's say, the centralized compute world, right? So if you look at what happened with cloud technology, so cloud roughly started gaining adoption in about, I think, mid 2000s to about 2010 is when we started seeing serious movement to cloud. We saw several different cloud companies, right? And over a period of time, we've seen a measure of consolidation where today, for example, if I asked you about cloud, you would say, yeah, AWS, Google Cloud,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you have, maybe a few other companies, you have Microsoft and, two, three other big companies. And then there's this big sharp drop off, right? Into and then you have like niche cloud companies which are solving like specific problems, like for example some might be solving for GPU acceleration, things like that,
Mm.
right? Different software layers. And then you have bare metal servers, etc. So the world of centralized compute, has some lessons for us. When you look at the world of decentralized compute, I think what's clear is that it will not be a winner take all market. There will be multiple chains in the future, and ultimately there will be maybe three or four big chains
Mm.
will have, let's say, bulk of the adoption, and then there will be these other niche use cases, right? And this is kind of how I see this. So when I look at layer twos or layer ones, etc., you always have to be a little pragmatic when it comes to looking at what the future might be. I think like currently as it stands, especially with its robust roadmap and the fact that the team has started delivering on the roadmap, we see with Ethereum right now with the recent like sort of updates, is that there's a I think there's a broad consensus already within the ecosystem that Ethereum is going to be one of those very large, right? And the advantage with Ethereum is that you have this diversity of layer two solutions, right? And then in layer twos also you got some interesting ones, like you have like situations like Immutable X, which is focused purely on, let's say, gaming. You've got Arbitrum, which is like very strong on DeFi, and then
Mm.
you have others like, let's say, Polygon and few others who are trying to be a mix of both. I think here Mantle in this layer two space is has a very unique positioning. I think if you look at Mantle in general, number one, that we're a very decentralized project. We've been incubated by a DAO. So all the funding for Mantle, all the core decisions of Mantle are taken by BitDAO, right? And
Mm.
BitDAO is controlled by the Bit token holders, right? So for example, if you're a Bit token holder, you can go to the DAO and you can take, decisions, you can do governance. And this is very important because, projects typically especially infrastructure projects typically start out as centralized entities and then they become a DAO eventually
Mm.
sometime, right? Like Optimism started, then it became collective. Arbitrum started, now we have Arbitrum DAO. With Mantle, we are already a DAO, right? And the DAO has actually created an infrastructure project. So I think that's something very unique about us, that we're very decentralized from day zero. The second thing is that if you look at other layer two blockchains, right, you have to launch a token, you have to build a community, you have to do many things. For us, we already have a very large community. So in at Mantle, we'll be using the Bit token, the same token which powers BitDAO. We'll be using the Bit token for gas fees as the ecosystem token, as the staking token. And what that means is that we already have a big community of Bit holders. Bit is already listed on all the major exchanges across the world, right? And then you have BitDAO, you've got the BitDAO invested companies, you've got Bybit, the exchange Bybit, which seeded BitDAO in the first place. You have the support of an exchange. You've got the venture arm of the exchange called Mirana Ventures, which is an LP in like all the top funds. Like, so Mirana Ventures is is sort of a limited partner in Animoca, Spartan, Lemniscap, Folius, like so many different companies and funds. And then you have a few other companies as well, like Yeehaw Games, Apex Dex. Like you've got so many different, like you've got such a big ecosystem already. And this kind of an ecosystem where you have a huge pool of liquidity in a DAO, and you have the support of an exchange, and you've got such a big ecosystem, and you have a token which is liquid, which is already listed on major exchanges. Like you have a situation where so many problems are already solved. I think this is what makes Mantle very unique, that we have the support of the Bit community, and we what we are trying to do is we're trying to take all of these different moving parts, bring them together into this one infrastructure piece, and build a lot of value for the Bit community, and essentially turn the Bit community into one of the most impactful Web3 communities, similar to how the Ethereum community has become the most impactful, like one of the most impactful Web3 communities out there. So I think that's what sets Mantle apart, that on the ecosystem front, like we have a very unique selling point or a very unique advantage which nobody else has, right? And even on the technology side, we've done a lot of innovation. So we've taken on optimistic rollup chain, we made several improvements to the optimistic rollup stack, we've integrated, so we've created, for example, a modular stack, we've integrated eigenlayer data availability solution right from day zero, we've got a fraud proof system from day zero. So it's there are a lot of unique advantages of the stack itself, which essentially uh, give you a sense that on the technology front and on the ecosystem front, like we've got a huge, like unique sort of selling proposition, which I think is very palatable to the user and to the developer. So for the user, you come to one place and you have access to such a big ecosystem. For the developer, we can take a developer from zero to grants to investments and all the way to listing. So for every participant in the network, we have like big advantage. And
Mm.
I think no other ecosystem in L3 or L2s or L1s can offer some.
I would like to follow up some question about the relation between the mental project and BitDAO and Bybit. You mentioned about that, but I'm not sure about the relation between those of them.
No, sure, definitely. So let me cover that. So I think I can cover Bybit, BitDAO, and Mantle. So in short, if I were to explain it in one line, so Bybit is one of the world's largest exchanges, right? When it comes to derivatives and community, and it's a very large centralized exchange. And BitDAO essentially sort of helped create Bybit, the exchange, helped create BitDAO, right? So if you remember, like when Binance had launched Binance Smart Chain, like Binance Smart Chain saw a lot of success, right? So and if you remember, everybody tried to copy the model, right? So
Yeah,
Huobi tried
yeah.
to create their own chain, OKX, like every exchange was creating their own chain, right? And it
Okay.
didn't quite work, right? And I think the founders of Bybit also had a option that, hey, we can also create a chain, but instead of creating a chain, they went with a more decentralized approach. So what the founders of Bybit
Got it.
decided, right? So the founders of Bybit decided that, okay, listen, instead of creating a chain, why don't we create a DAO, right?
Okay.
And we create a DAO with a token. It will have its own community, and then the community can decide if they want to build a chain, if they want to do like tooling, whatever the community wants to do, they will decide, right?
Okay,
And,
okay. I
and if
got
we
it.
follow, yeah, and if we follow this approach, then it will lead to better outcome rather than going out there and trying to copy like somebody else, right? So this is kind of what Bybit decided. So then this led to the creation of BitDAO, right? And BitDAO was initially, that is the reason why BitDAO was created as an investment DAO, where the idea was to find new and interesting ideas and invest in them so that you can accelerate the Web3 adoption.
Okay.
So in the time, BitDAO has done some investments. So they made investments in gaming, in Game 7. They made investments in for example, education with EduDAO, and Mantle is one of those investments now. So, because there's a big ecosystem, there's an exchange, there's a DAO. The DAO has like $2.5 billion of liquidity.
Mm,
All of
mm.
this is on chain. So with these many resources, it just made sense to create like an infrastructure piece like Mantle, and then essentially wrap this entire ecosystem with an infrastructure piece so that you can take a project through its entire life cycle, where you can sort of take a project, provided liquidity, be able to take it all the way for listing and then beyond, right? Which I think is a very sort of interesting, like I said, proposition, right? Which nobody else can allow. So this is kind of how the relationship is there, where Bybit essentially created BitDAO to invest in like Web3 opportunities, and Mantle is one of those investors. So all of our funding, for example, has come from the DAO and its treasury.
Okay, got it. I would like to understand about the project that may have a chance to evolving in the future in the Mantle chain, and what new developments can we expect to see from the team or in the coming month of the Mantle project?
Sure, definitely. So number one, our testnet is already live. So our testnet went live in January, and we've seen a huge amount of adoption on our testnet itself. And what we plan to see is over the next few months is that number one, we'll be going into mainnet, and we'll be going into mainnet pretty soon. So by the end of June, we'll be in mainnet, sort of launch.
End of June?
Yeah,
So
so
sorry.
that's the plan. So end of June, or even if you're able to do it before that, it's great. The audits have already started, and we've already got some audit reports as well. So we are making improvements and fixes. But possibly by the end of June or early July is when we expect to see the mainnet come out. Also, like since we already have a very big ecosystem, a number of projects have committed to launching on Mantle. So as time progresses, like we will have more and more projects going live. And I think it's on the developer relation side as well. Like we've seen a huge uptake in like every hackathon which we've done, etc. We've had a huge number of participants. Like just if I just consider hackathons itself, over the last, let's say, 2-3 months, we've had over, I think, 500 to 600 projects deploy across different hackathons. So every hackathon we participate, we get like good participation. So I think it's fairly exciting. Our tech stack is fairly exciting for developers. So we expect to see more adoption. We expect to see the mainnet launch. What we will expect to see are other partnerships, which we will keep announcing in the days to come, right? And this is kind of what you will see over the next few weeks. And then once mainnet starts, that's when we can really start pushing for more and more adoption of Mantle.
Okay, before we going in the live, I would like to take some comment. Can Google also use BTC, Visa, Mastercard, other payment on Google Play Store in the premium in-game purchase can be possible? And what can happen? What do you think?
I think Google and every major company is exploring some form of crypto payment option, right? I think the fact that it's a payment, which means that you will have to conform to payment norms, which is there must be in KYC. You have to figure out, whether the funds have come from a legitimate source. Like, some of those problems remain, but I think if those can be solved, then there is no reason why a company like Google or any other company, whether it's Microsoft or Apple or whatever, would not want to accept crypto payments. I think the technology is there. They also, I think the intent is also there. It's just that because it's a payment, you have to sort of ascribe to payment norms and regulations. And as long as you are able to do that, then I don't think it should be a problem. So this is not a technology problem. It's more of a compliance problem, right?
Yeah, exactly. สวัสดีครับพี่บิดอยากได้เสื้อพี่บิดครับอยากได้เสื้อนะโอเคถ้าอยากได้เสื้อใช้วิธีนี้นะครับสแกน QR code นะเพื่อที่จะรับ point นะครับไอ้ point ตัวนี้ก็เอามาแลกเสื้อได้นะสแกนได้เลยนะครับhe want to ask about the trend of the IPFS in the future.
I think, I mean, IPFS is already very broadly used, right? IPFS was, I think, one of the first, you could say, truly distributed technologies to come out there, and so many NFTs are now stored on IPFS. I think what we're going to see with IPFS is definitely more adoption. I think what is interesting about IPFS is also the technology stack in itself, right? So if you look at, for example, certain networking libraries which have been produced by IPFS team are being used in blockchain as well.
Oh really?
Yeah, definitely. So if you look at some of the networking libraries which the IPFS team has come up with, like, some of them are being used. So I think in terms of distributed and networking technology, I think IPFS team has so much to offer. Now, in terms of how the IPFS may be used or leveraged, that's an interesting question, because whenever you store any data in any database, right, you need to ensure its security. You need to ensure that its provenance. You need to be able to ensure. You need to be able to solve like a bunch of problems, right? This is where technologies like Filecoin, etc., become interesting. Where by adding like a token layer and by adding like an execution layer, now you're able to do many more things, right? Within let's say a storage environment, then you would be able to do maybe over IPFS. So I think what IPFS lacks is an execution layer, which like Filecoin and Siri network, like some of these other projects are bringing. So I think IPFS will continue to obviously stay very relevant. It'll be used by the open source world for a long time to come. I think it's been one of the very pivotal technologies, which sort of has helped blockchain also a lot. So I was talking about those networking libraries. I was talking, let's say, for example, libp2p, right? So it's a networking library, peer-to-peer networking library, which has been pioneered by the IPFS group. So this is kind of what I see for IPFS, like more adoption. But I think if you have something like Filecoin, which is storage plus execution, then the possibilities of what you can do with the data are more. So I do expect to see like more innovation there versus maybe purely IPFS. Yeah.
Do you have a plan to drop the reward or airdrop in mental?
I can neither confirm nor deny this piece of information. So we do have incentivization plans. I think our incentivization plans will be very unique. It's something we're discussing internally right now before we talk about it to the community. But do we have a plan? Yes, we do. And stay tuned for more updates.
Okay, it's because somebody in the live they are airdrop hunter.
No, it's perfectly fine. I don't have a problem with that. But like I said, like, we will have an incentivization program, except that, we want to give it like a more unique sort of spin versus doing what everybody else is doing right now, right? Where you do some transactions, you get airdrop. Like, it has to be more meaningful than that. And that's essentially what we want to do. And we also want to make it fun and interesting. That's the approach which we are adopting right now.
Okay. Before we end live, I would like to notice my audience ใครที่ได้บิตใครที่ได้ตัว point เก็บ 5,000 point อย่าลืมนะครับนี่ Keystone นะเดี๋ยวมาแจกฟรีนะ 5,000 point นะครับแล้วก็เสื้อที่อยู่ในรูปนี้จะเป็นสีขาวนะเดี๋ยวพี่ยังไม่ได้ปรับเป็นสีขาวนะเสื้อ Bitcast นะ อันนี้ 2,500 point นะครับรวมไปถึงตัวที่เป็น hardware wallet ยี่ห้อ One Key ด้วยเดี๋ยวจะมีมาแจกเพิ่มนะครับสำหรับใครที่สะสมตัว point นะครับสแกน QR code ได้เลยใครที่ยังไม่มีกระเป๋าเนาะมันก็จะไปโหลดตัว Freedom App ให้อัตโนมัติบอกเข้าไปเป็น Google Form ใช่ไหมใครที่ยังไม่เคยโหลดเลยปุ๊บมันจะได้ตัว point เลยนะครับแต่ถ้าใครที่เคยโหลดแล้วให้ copy address ใส่ไว้ใน Google Form นะแล้วเดี๋ยวทีมงานเนี่ยจะจัดส่งไปให้ทุกวันเสาร์นะครับใครไม่ได้ก็มาร้องเรียนอีกทีนึงนะสำหรับใครที่ไม่ได้ติดตามในไลฟ์ก็ไปดูในวิดีโอที่เราจะตัดต่อไปให้ไปคอมเมนต์ไว้ใต้วิดีโอนะเดี๋ยวพี่จะส่งให้อีกคอมเมนต์ละ10 point นะครับสำหรับตอนนี้ก็คงประมาณนี้นะครับ I would like to express my gratitude to my special guest for today and I would like to say thank you to my audience that they has a lot of always listen to me in Thai but right now it is a special edition that I interview special guests that in English version and they waiting me to translate what you talk about the content. Thank you so much, Arjun, for
No, sure,
being here,
definitely. Yeah.
and you give us a lot of informative and it has a lot of good information for our audience and to me too. Thank you so much. And next time, I'm looking forward to bringing you more insight and analysis from the world of crypto in the future. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for having me. Thank you, guys.
Bye. สวัสดีครับ